Hey everyone, try to keep this relatively short. So the media, what is the media? Is it good or bad? Well, yes, obviously. It's both. But we live in a particularly interesting time. So let's do a quick jog back through history. There have always been what we would call town criers, which is literally people that just yelled out to the right in the town square and told people what was going on. They shared information. Now, consider there was great controls over what kind of things they could share, what kind of things they could yell about, because free speech didn't exist for almost all of human history. So there was always a value and a desire and a need to share information with the masses, particularly about what the government is doing. What did the king say about this or that? Is there a new law? Was a law repealed? Those types of things. Very useful, very necessary. After the First Amendment was ratified with the Bill of Rights here in the United States, it was enshrined in law that you could say and write things and share ideas without any penalty from the government. Almost anything. Over time, we have limited what you can say through free speech in small ways, but largely it's been left untouched. Okay, consider in World War II, the media, the journalism in general, whether it's radio or print, was really operating hand in glove with the government because we had a really global war, the Pacific, right, and in the European theater, Eastern and Western theaters, and this was a big freaking deal. And so the media worked with the government to create propaganda, to direct American interests and sentiments towards the goal of victory in a host of ways. And if you go to the Smithsonian in DC, you can go through this exhibit, and it's cool. I'm an academic, whatever, but any adult who thinks about history in any way would go, it's kind of impressive. But that wasn't always the case. And in Vietnam, things changed. And journalism, which was about sharing information, but also kind of about working with the government to push a certain narrative, diverted from that role and told the truth in a way that government probably didn't prefer. Watergate scandal, right, where I think Republican actors under Nixon had broken into a thing and tried to steal information, and then it ended up being a huge scandal. And he left office over it. The media shared that. Vietnam War. We used to have a perspective on war, but in Vietnam, for the first time, the public masses got to really see war in a way that you just can't share from across an ocean in a different part of the world. But news, photographs, video footage, reporters on the ground could tell that story in a first-hand way, nearly second-hand way, that made Americans change their perspective on how great of an idea that all was. So the media's role has changed over time. It's always been valuable that we have an element within society that can disseminate information, particularly about what government is doing, but about a whole other host of issues as well, because humans are interested and we're social creatures and we like to know what's going on. The media is good for that. Things took an interesting turn in the late 90s, early 2000s, particularly after 9/11. Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, which came later, these were 24-hour news channels that produced surprisingly small amount of content for the amount of time they were on air. But we were just bombarded with bits of information. At the time, it was largely driven by war on terror, and we had just been attacked at 9/11 and all that. So people were scared and nervous and anxious and wanted to know what was going on. And any amount of information, kind of made people feel better, I guess. This only expanded further. The digital age changed things greatly once again. Before I go further, though, consider if you're a full-time consumer of Fox News, you're only getting a part of the story. If you're a full-time consumer of MSNBC or CNN, similar. One of the challenges with media is that they found that it's a very effective tool for mobilizing public in this direction or that direction, of gaining support for certain ideas, policies, or entire political parties, as is evidenced by my previous example. But also, there's money to be made in advertising. All of these things corrupt what would be this idealistic or pure form of journalism. which may never really exist because humans. And so the once assumed neutrality of the virtuous journalist devolved into a power game and a manipulation game and a propaganda game, which on some level was always kind of in play, right? World War II example. There you go. None of this is particularly healthy, and most of what those channels did was scare you, right? They vilified the other side or the opposing perspective. Because if you think sex sells, trust me, fear sells better. And any psychologist or marketer worth their salt will tell you the same. It's still important that we know what's going on in society, whether it be foreign actions, foreign engagement. We like to hear about our sports. We like our human interest stories. We certainly want to know what's going on with the economy, and we want to know what the government's doing. So journalism is just never going to go away. The media, in that sense, is always going to fulfill that role in some way or another. The big change over my lifetime has been who's in control. Previously, for most of my life, there was a very small number of very wealthy individuals that controlled, I would say, 5 different individuals. Rupert Murdoch was one of them, but there's a handful of others. He's in charge of Fox News, the Murdoch family, Rupert Murdoch. Only 5 individuals for all the news you're going to consume on all different platforms. You think you're getting all these perspectives. 5. Digital media changed that. It democratized information in a way that was both chaotic but positive, because there was this sort of a monopoly, a stranglehold on who got to tell you what was going on. TikTok, but before that, even Facebook, YouTube, take your pick, X, Twitter, right? These are all different platforms where you and I could just decide, I am going to read the news to people every day. I'm going to tell them what's going on. I'm going to tell them what this person thinks, what this person thinks. I'm going to present this perspective. I'm going to present this perspective. And I'm going to be a journalist. I'm going to be and not even an amateur journalist, because there's no licensing for journalism, because you're exercising the free speech. There is no limiting it. Well, this changed the game drastically. And once people started to see, there's 2 different things that were clearly evident. The democratization of information through the digital era and through social media was a great boon, in that expanded the number of perspectives that we could consume. It gave us more choice. That was good. It was also chaotic, in that there was so much we could never possibly consume it all, nor could we be sure of how legitimate the claims being made were that we were, consuming. It was a no small challenge, and it exists to this day, and it's probably going to get worse. And AI is going to make it worse. So we are at a time now where the old guard, the mainstream media, the big channels, Fox, CNN, MSNBC, are losing viewership. They're struggling to try to find a new foothold in the marketplace. The traditional newspapers are falling even further, because younger people don't even read newspapers. They read things on their phone or digitally, and fewer of them have a subscription to those outlets. Washington Post, LA Times, New York Times, and the like. Most of us, and I may be a bit of an oddball, because I'm a baby Gen Xer, but I get almost all my information from digital media. And I have kind of a curated list of people and individuals and platforms that I go to that I think are pretty trustworthy. And I kind of know where their reporting and their research comes from. I either know them as academics or as professional journalists, whatever it is. And it's all kind of taken on faith, which is no small concern. And I'll leave you with this. Last week, I shared a video where an image of Dr. John Mearsheimer from Chicago University, the eminent political theorist and academic, who has written many, many best-selling works, is probably the most respected academic in his field in terms of offensive realism in international relations theory. I'm a fan. I consume his material so often that it's not even worth it for me to subscribe to his Substack, because I consume all of his interviews and podcasts, discussions, and lectures from all these different sources. But I was listening to this one the other day, and I thought, geez, John is really driving home this like, there's almost like a level of hubris, arrogance, and even malice in the American foreign policy and the expansion of NATO that he argues is one of the pressures biggest pressure that led to the war in Ukraine. So I started digging a little deeper and I became curious. Once I looked at the video, as many of you pointed out, it wasn't real. That wasn't John Mearsheimer, and those weren't his ideas. There were some elements of his ideas in there, but by and large, that went off his script in a very different direction. So what I discovered is that someone was using AI and the image of a well-respected academic to put forward ideas that were not attributed to that academic. And in fact, those are largely talking points that come out of Russia and the Kremlin in support of the war on behalf of Russia, legitimizing their actions in Ukraine. Now, it's important to note, Dr. Mearsheimer does agree with some of those sentiments, but the video that I share with you goes way beyond where he goes and makes claims far beyond what he would make, and in some extent counter what he actually believes. I did that because I was curious to see how many of you would recognize that was fake. Somebody produced it, put it together. That's true. And those are ideas. They do exist, but they're not attributed to that guy with his body of work and research and knowledge and experience. It's a psyop. It's probably a Russian psyop. I'm kind of excited that I found. I say all this to say we are in a very, very tough position because our democratic republic and our participatory democracy relies on the fact that we all know what's going on and we spend time to inform ourselves of the facts so that we can make decisions, informed decisions about reality. That's becoming harder and harder to do, not just because of the 50,000 different possible perspectives that you could consume. And then you have to figure, well, some of those are just illegitimate perspectives. But then some of those legitimate perspectives are supported by fake or bad evidence. So then you have an even smaller subset. And you find out that it's very hard to know exactly, truthfully, what's going on. And to add insult to injury, now AI can be used to fabricate reality. And so what does this do to our relationship with our government, which is the point of the chapter that we read this week? How does this impact our relationship with our government? Negatively. It impacts it negatively.